CTV's W5. A parent's joy.
I can see it.
A family's pain.
In the next few months, your child's gonna die.
A diagnosis that would forever change their lives.
How's your pain this morning?
Good.
And reveal the remarkable strength of one brave little boy.
James was always willing to fight.
Sadly, the majority of children don't survive.
Ava's Favreau.
Where were the tumors in his body?
All over the place.
With how a child brought new hope and much needed inspiration and re-energized the fight to conquer an unforgiving cancer.
Our goal is that a child should never get cancer again.
This is CTV's W5. Here is Lloyd Robertson.
Welcome to W5. How can an 8-year-old boy change the face of childhood cancer? Transform a neglected disease into cutting-edge science? Turn scientists into invigorated pioneers? Big shoes for a small, fragile boy whose body is racked with cancer. But that's exactly what James Birrell did. His story is a tragedy, but it also gives incredible hope to all those searching for cures in the field of cancer. Here is CTV's medical specialist, Ava Favreau, with James's legacy.
James Birrell was like most 4-year-olds. He loved adventures and he loved trains.
Push it, buddy. Ready? Here we go.
But unlike most youngsters, he started to develop some troubling symptoms that worried his parents, Pam and Sid Birrell.
He vomits, he doesn't feel well, he's feverish. And it seems about every 2 weeks that something like that is happening. Then he started complaining of leg pains, and he didn't want to walk.
I took him up for a bone scan to the hospital, and then the radiologist came in and had a look, and I asked him what he was seeing. And he said, well, we are seeing a tumor of sorts.
It was a diagnosis that no parent wants to hear.
It's very hard for me to talk about this. She came screaming up in the car, fell out of the car on the ground and said, James has got cancer. And she was just beating the ground. James was sitting there in his chair, kind of being James. And that's how we found out our kid had cancer.
Not just any cancer, but one of the most terrifying forms of the disease that can strike a child. And yet one that most of us have never heard of, neuroblastoma.
When they used the word neuroblastoma, do you remember what you thought?
What is this word? For the first 3 weeks, can you tell me what that word was again, please? Neuroblastoma.
And at that point when he was diagnosed, where were the tumors in his body?
Everywhere. Hundreds aside. You can feel them here, wherever, all over the place.
It was a devastating blow, even more painful because his mother, Pam, had just finished 8 months of chemotherapy for her breast cancer.
Well, when we went through my breast cancer, we kept saying there is only one thing worse, and that would be to see your child go through it.
Now she was going to have to watch James go through surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Neuroblastoma is a rare form of cancer that attacks the nervous system. Up to 100 cases are diagnosed in Canada each year, usually among young children. No one knows exactly what causes it, but by the time symptoms emerge, it's usually spread, and there is no cure. So sadly, the majority of children don't survive. In James's case, that first round of treatments worked. All of those tiny tumors throughout his body disappeared.
How's your pain this morning?
Good.
Is it?
After I started moving my head a lot, pain went away.
I guess you thought it was behind you.
No one with an ounce of intelligence will think it's behind you. That was a particularly difficult time to live because every twitch, cough, sneeze, headache, stomach ache is just a disease. You live that way round the clock.
James, what did you get in your basket?
My old garden gloves.
Excellent.
You never know when the executioner is going to knock on your front door and serve you with papers and say, in the next few months, your child's going to die.
But the Birrell family lived with hope, fueled by faith and by deep roots in their hometown of Peterborough, Ontario, where Sid played the organ at a local church, and where James lived in a home filled with music. But 18 months into his remission, the cancer came roaring back. That's when his family faced the harsh reality of neuroblastoma. It's a killer without a cure.
So that brings us to another of the worst days of our life, because we're back to sick kids, did the scans and meet the doctor, and gave us the news and said, I'm sorry, this is really bad, but we don't have a cure. Your son's gonna die. Give you a year, but we can't give you 2.
Neuroblastoma is what's called an orphan disease. With less than 1,000 children diagnosed around the world each year, it doesn't get much research money. It doesn't catch the eye of research companies. And so there's very little to offer patients when the cancer comes back.
Were you frustrated with what you saw was out there for kids with neuroblastoma? Or how
Unbelievably
little?
frustrated, bitter, angry, appalled, shocked.
So round 2 of treatment involved even higher doses of more toxic chemotherapy. It made James so violently ill, his family asked him if he wanted to stop and let the disease take its course.
So when I approached James and they'd said it's time to let him go, and said, you know, they're not sure that they should give you chemo. Maybe it's time for you to go to your house in heaven. Maybe it's time for you to be with Jesus. He said, give me chemo. I'm always going to be fighting. So they gave him chemo.
Cancer in the spine, in the mandible.
And that's when his doctor, Sylvain Berrell, realized that James was unique.
James was always willing to fight as long as he understood why and what he was fighting for. What was the medication? What could be the side effect? How long he would be receiving? How many pokes? How many IVs? What were the results in mice? And then he would give a consent. It's not very common for a 7-year-old child to be able to consent to experimental medicine treatment. So he was a very unique child.
So unique, he even started raising money to fight his own disease. So at the family church, they held the first fundraiser.
Invited everyone to our church. Come to church Sunday night, bring your checkbooks, going to start the James Fund.
And hundreds came.
This is my friend, Dr. Birrell. Please welcome him.
Even though James was struggling with extreme pain, he found the strength to embrace his doctor. They raised the first $30,000, the goal to find a cure for James.
Sent it down to sick kids. Another 70 arrived pretty fast, and sick kids got to work.
But while scientists raced to find new treatments for him, James was in another race. The tumors were growing bigger and faster, and he was in tremendous pain.
One day, the pain went real high, and I could never get up, and I kept lying down on the sofa.
But he was still dreaming the dreams of a child.
And while he was in the palliative care room at our local hospital, he met a nurse, and she saw him reading a soapbox derby book, and she said, my husband made 2 of these for my kids. Would you like to meet my husband?
And he did. He met James Mewett, a local engineer who helped James design his racer.
My thinking going in was there was a very good chance that he wasn't going to be well enough to complete the whole process.
Amazingly, James rallied.
Hi, James. Are you going to be racing? You guys are doing serious. You're going to be racing next. Yes.
He made it. He made it. We still couldn't believe James would be alive, let alone healthy. And September the 8th came, and he was grinning, gargling with his orange juice, and off to the races.
You broke the speed limit. You went 51 kilometers an hour.
He won his first race. He even held the fastest time. A day where the disease was behind him, and the finish line his only worry. Then a spectacular spin-out right before the finish. James didn't win the race, but that didn't bother him in the least.
What do you think about when you're racing?
What I think about is I'm always thinking about having fun.
He fulfilled his dream. He raced, he built his racer. It was just an incredible day, an incredible story of I'm going to stay alive and I'm going to do that.
What an amazing finish. Amazing, James.
One of the most striking things that I always remember James for was the way he would hug you. It was the way he hugged everybody that he loved.
Excellent work.
It really was a profound experience that anybody who felt a James hug could tell you about.
By now, the tumors were in his knees, hips, his skull, and his jaw.
And James had an ability to say some pretty special things along the way. And
Yes.
he surprised you
Yes.
more than a few times. What are the memorable things that he said during his fight?
Cuddled up after another bad day, said, James, how do you handle all this? You know, this is a difficult day. And the scan didn't go well, and they didn't find a vein, and it hurt, and there was nothing good. How do you? And he said, well, Dad, can't let cancer ruin your day.
It was James's motto, and it became the inspiration for those around him.
That's what I've learned from James, and we keep going with this message. Find new drugs, explain again and again, be realistic, be honest. These drugs are not the miracle drug, but they bring a lot of hope for the future.
But that miracle didn't materialize for James. Just after his 8th birthday, he died.
Was there a sense of relief at all by that point?
The first piece in many, many years happened at that point. And it was quite simple. At the point where he was dead, I woke up Pam, and all of a sudden there's no more rushing. That's it. Rushing is over.
Deeply honored today to extend a warm welcome to all of you who have gathered for this celebration of the life of James Anthony Birrell.
But his story didn't end with his death. During his 4-year struggle with neuroblastoma, James unknowingly gave birth to something very important.